Hello, and welcome to Spotlights. This is the podcast for the Yale Forum on Religion and Ecology. And this week, I'm really excited to welcome onto our program Freya Mathews. Freya, thanks so much for being here.
Thanks, Sam. Great to be here.
Yeah, it's really a privilege and a pleasure to have you on. For people who don't know you, a little introduction is worth mentioning. You're Emeritus Professor of Environmental Philosophy at La Trobe University and a prolific author in the world of environmental philosophy. Some of your many books include The Ecological Self, which was originally published in 1991, reissued a couple of years ago with a new introduction. So for people who think they already know that book, check out the new edition. Also, For Love of Matter, a contemporary panpsychism, Re-inhabiting Reality, Towards a Recovery of Culture, and your new book, which just came out, The Tao of Civilization, A Letter to China. And then along with those books, you're the author of over 100 essays, chapters, and articles talking about ecological philosophy. And most recently, you're talking a lot about ecological civilization, applying indigenous perspectives to contemporary global society, and still talking about panpsychism and critiquing the metaphysics of modernity, and writing about conservation ethics. So really tremendous work that you've done. And I know I'm personally a big fan of your work, so it's just really a treat to get to talk to you.
Well, thanks so much, and likewise.
Oh, thank you so much.
And there's so much to talk about, isn't there, with ecology? I mean, it is all encompassing and it is inexhaustible, and it would take like 10 lives to begin to address all the different topics that fall under this emerging paradigm.
Right. Yeah. One of the reasons I love this field of study is precisely that complexity and the depth, the richness of it. And I also appreciate that, your writing is, you do academic, scholarly work. There's also a personal tone to some of your writing. There's also creative writing that you do. And so there's this lovely poem that was published in a collection, Cloud Climbers, a couple of years ago. And it's called Let the Mountain Be Your Temple. So I want to read just a few stanzas of that to kind of help set the tone for a lot of what we're going to be talking about today. So let the mountain be your temple. Let the mountain be your temple, the forest your cloister, the river your pilgrim path. Let the animals be your sangha, the birds your angels, the insects your Indra jewels. Let elephants be your prophets, whales your gurus, dolphins your blessed assemblies. Let the desert be your doorstep, stars the needles of beauty that open your wound, sky your liberation. That's just the beginning of a really beautiful poem. I'll put a link in the episode so people can access the full poem. But really, it speaks to a lot of what your work is about, which is embedding yourself in your ecosystem, finding the truth of who you are by connecting to land, life, to the planet. So I want to, before we get into a lot of the specifics of your recent work, I want to hear a little bit of the backstory. How did you come to this kind of connection to land, right? And there's so many people who get into philosophy who don't see the connection with ecology. And likewise, so many people study ecology just as a science, and it doesn't become this personal, deep, meaningful endeavor. So I wonder, in your life, how did you get into this kind of work?
Yeah, it's the story of my life, Sam. It's the whole story of my life. It begins at the beginning and it never stops. And I think, as for many people who have a strong ecological intuition, it really began with childhood experiences. And I think I was just incredibly lucky to be in circumstances that allowed those experiences to happen as a kid. My family lived in a rural area just beyond the city limits, and we had a few acres of land, and we had lots of domestic animals, and I had a horse. This is the key to my biography. I had a horse, and my horse, like from the age of 7 or 8, I was riding around the countryside on my horse, often alone and feeling so safe and secure as a little girl in this wide open, countryside, deserted of people. But because I was on my horse, I was fine. I could go wherever I wanted. I had this wonderful communion with a large animal, because as a horse rider, you just have to have that kind of communion with with this other intelligence, large, imposing intelligence, and you have to be able to negotiate with that intelligent being for your mutual ends. And the horse kind of introduces you to a horsey landscape. You go where you wouldn't normally go if you were like riding a bike or walking or something, and you jump fences and you see logs and things that offer opportunities that you wouldn't otherwise notice, like you can jump logs. So I just had really, really wonderful imprinting sort of experiences as a kid out in, as we would say here now, in Australia, following Indigenous terminology. I was out on country and really experiencing country as a presence, and quite a responsive presence. And I think that was very powerful, but I didn't find that experience kind of mirrored in any way in my culture. It wasn't mirrored. I did go to Sunday school. I had that kind of very lukewarm, anemic, suburban Australian Christianity that was just about really social inclusion, going to church on Sunday, but not deeply felt. And I didn't find any resonance there with these experiences that were kind of had become second nature to me. And in my education at school, I didn't find any resonance with that experience. That education didn't speak to that experience or illuminate it in any way, Science didn't. Science seemed to have nothing to do with it, interesting as it was. So I think I was just, I wasn't asking, what is this experience or anything, but there was a receptivity there that when I later in high school, I started studying Greek philosophy, ancient Greek philosophy, and or ancient Greek history, and I encountered the pre-Socratics, and I just loved them instantly. I just loved them. I had quotes from Heraclitus and Parmenides, up on my wall in my room rather than the Beatles. So they were asking the questions, and they were questions that were completely open. There were questions about like, what is the world made of? What is the world? What does it consist in? How did it begin? Those sorts of questions. And somehow that spoke to, what I had experienced out there on country. And they didn't offer preset answers either, like maybe science asked such questions, but you knew that there was a preset answer to such questions. And maybe religion asked such questions too, but you knew the kind of answer you were going to get in religion. Whereas in philosophy, you didn't know what kind of answer you were going to get. It was completely open. So then in first year university, I took philosophy, and that was okay. That was in Melbourne. And then the next year, I happened for various reasons to end up in London. This is in the late 60s. and just to renew my visa to be able to stay there, I thought I'd better enroll in university, and I enrolled in a philosophy degree, a pure philosophy degree at London University and Bedford College. And it was absolutely awful. I just hated it because this was the height of analytical philosophy. And I mean, if I thought science was reductive or religion was reductive, this was a whole other order of reductiveness. You know, this reduced everything to language, logical formalism, sense data, things like that. It was so reductive. And metaphysics was completely out of the picture. I mean, it was an object of ridicule at that time,
Right.
in that context. So I absolutely hated it. But I had to keep doing it because I had to renew my visa. And eventually there was one woman who taught at Bedford College, and she empathized, you know, and she said, "You've got a penchant for metaphysics. So I'm going to take you back." This is in the days when you had one-to-one tutorials with your tutor, you know, and those tutorials would often last for hours. You'd while away the afternoon with your tutor discussing the topics of your choice. Incredible to do that now. But she said, "I'm going to take you back to the 17th century when they did metaphysics, pre-Kant, you know."
Right.
So it took me back to Leibniz and Spinoza. And I spent that whole year just studying on my own with her, Leibniz and Spinoza, and I just adored them. And I mean, I adored Leibniz because it was so ingenious, but I adored Spinoza because it spoke directly to these intuitions that I was filled with, you know. And this was the first time I had ever had any kind of template of ideas within which to fit those intuitions. So the only reason I studied in philosophy was because I encountered Spinoza at the age of 20 or 21 and became a Spinozist, and I'm still a Spinozist. And then I don't know if you wanted such a long answer to your question, but it was then another journey to be able to work as a, you know, after my PhD. I couldn't do a PhD on metaphysics because it just wasn't allowed. So I did a PhD on the ontological foundations of modal logic. That was the only way that you got to do anything to do with ontology,
right.
if it were part of semantics, you know. But eventually, after a bit of a journey, environmental philosophy started to happen. This is in the 80s. And when I found it, I immediately thought, yeah, this is me. This is where I belong. Because it was so open at that time, and metaphysics was relevant, you know. It was really, well, I always certainly saw, and many others did too, I think, you know, saw the environmental problematic as coming down, you know, at the most fundamental level to a question of worldviews, and to the recognition of the reductive, the consequences of a reductive scientific worldview for our praxis, and the need for an alternative metaphysical grounding for everything in Western society, our selfhood, our society, and of course, our relationship to the natural environment, and therefore a different foundation for our praxis, our economic praxis. So that was like when I finally landed somewhere where I could pursue this sense of our relation with the natural world, including, not just the natural ecological environment, but the cosmos at large. Mm-hmm. That the environmental philosophy made it possible for me to pursue that sense of reality in the way that I wanted to. And that's just what I've done ever since.
Yeah, right. And made some really amazing contributions to that field. So, no, great answer. Some people have very short answers when I ask that question, and some people have long answers. I like them all. I'm just always so curious how people get into this kind of work. And I also appreciate that you're mentioning the cosmos, because sometimes environment just means the planet, and people forget about that larger cosmic context. And I think that's still something that I think a lot of environmental philosophers miss, and it's really front and center in your work. So yeah, I really appreciate that. Speaking of metaphysics and the kind of reductive nature of modern science, this is some of what's coming up in the new book, right? Which is really good. Can't recommend it enough. I haven't finished it yet, but I've really been enjoying it. So, The Tao of Civilization: A Letter to China. I can see a lot of your earlier work still coming through there, panpsychism and stuff like that. But then this new dimension where you're talking directly to China. And so, the book opens with this really powerful letter to President Xi Jinping, kind of saying, hey, China, you've got a responsibility here. And if you want to be a great nation, what is greatness? And then you're kind of saying maybe we should pay attention to the Taoist context of Chinese thinking. You can draw on that for more ecological civilization. So I'm just wondering if you could share with us, why China? What happened that led you to write this book specifically addressing the context in China?
Well, I think because of that, well, where to start? Clearly, I'm also, of course, very influenced by Aboriginal Australia, the thinking of Aboriginal Australia, which is being revealed little by little, increasingly. Back in the day, there was very little authored by Aboriginal authors themselves. And in the last 10 to 20 years, there's been a kind of explosion of Aboriginal authored scholarship. And this has led to, has enabled deeper perspectives into Aboriginal thought from outside Aboriginal society. So the way of thinking about cosmos and our relation to it within Aboriginal traditions here in Australia and elsewhere, but I really only focus on Aboriginal Australia because this is where I am, it is in every way so different from the Western paradigm or the Western worldview that's, so deeply dualist and so deeply reductive materialist. For Aboriginal people, the land, which is also cosmos, because there's they prefer the term country now to land, because country has this connotation of being a living entity that's sentient and responsive in communication with its people and everything. It's a local cosmos, but all cosmos is local. All cosmos is different manifestations of local country. So in Aboriginal thought, there is this, it is about a living cosmos, which is a local cosmos. And the everything within each local cosmos is a manifestation of law. Dreaming law comes out of law. And law is what I've been calling this ought that is core to the is. Again, Western science divides the world up into fact and value, and fact belongs to ontology, and value is just our human projections onto the world of fact. There is no intrinsic value in nature itself. But it's just the other way around for Aboriginal thinking. There is this overriding law at the core of reality, and our job as humans is to align with this law, to know what it is and to align with it. So I think that we can adapt Western metaphysics to this kind of view. Like if we can also posit a living cosmos, and that has some kind of resonance with the scientific worldview. It takes into account what the scientific project has discovered about reality, which is undeniable what it has discovered. Like we can fly to the moon. We know that the universe is this immense place within which we can travel. We can send spaceships to, other planets and whatnot. So it's not just a construct. It is actually, science does reveal aspects of the nature of reality. But I think we can develop the metaphysical theories that allow for that include that empirical aspect of reality, but also go beyond it and uncover other aspects of reality. And, I've tried to do that in my work through the idea of living cosmos panpsychism. So the world is, the universe is a living system, a self-realizing system that includes a core. I have to use the word cognitivity because it's really key for me. Cognitivity from Carnatas, it's a Spinoza's term, that is the will to self-preservation, self-existence, self-increase. So this is not just like a force of physics. This is a will. So it has intentionality as part of it. And so it's not inconsistent with science to go beyond the scientific picture and say, well, actually, to explain a lot of things that are just riddles in science, like why did the universe come into existence? Why in particular has it unfolded as a manifold that includes life, living entities, intelligent entities? That's the anthropic problem in physics, because physicists point out that actually, relative to the laws of physics, the known laws of physics and the initial conditions of the evolution of the universe, the emergence of living things, intelligent things, things with mind, was very unlikely. So I think that we can provide an account of something like a cosmological panpsychism that is not only consistent with what physics tells us about reality, but actually explains some of the things that physics can't explain. And that if we do view the universe in that kind of way, I mean, there must be many, many ways of formulating that view of things, you know, but I have just chosen a particular way of articulating it in terms of panpsychism. Then as a self-realizing system with a core connectivity of its own, a core will to maintain, come into existence, maintain its existence, and increase its existence, then that connectivity will presumably unfold in a certain way. There will be a kind of principle, a logic to that unfolding. And everything that exists in that cosmos will serve that larger end of unfolding, of self-increase, self-preservation, self-maintenance, and self-increase. So if we could discover what that principle was, then we ourselves would know what role we were meant to be playing in that universe. Because while many other objects, maybe, you know, rudimentary, simple beings, don't have much choice in the matter. They just unfold according to that principle because they don't have reflexive consciousness. But beings like us have reflexive consciousness, so we can think about what we want and feel. We can think about our instincts that have been naturally selected for us through processes of evolution, and we can change them if we want to, and we have changed them. So we can actually work against that principle if we choose to. So for us, it becomes incumbent on us, once we see things this way, it becomes incumbent on us to try to rediscover what that principle of unfolding is, and then to align our behavior and our inner life to that principle. Because, you know, it's pretty obvious that in the long term, it's not much use living against the grain of the cosmos. It's not a very good idea to live against the grain of the cosmos. So we need to discover that grain, feel that grain again, and align every aspect of our life and our society to that grain in just the way that Aboriginal people had always done. They called that principle law, first law, dreaming law, and it was a relational principle. It was a principle of reciprocity, mutuality, respect for all things, a sense of the autonomy of all things, a seeking of balance in all things. So, you know, this is variously narrativized across different Aboriginal societies, but that core of relationality and mutuality is always there in these different renderings of law in Aboriginal society. So I think that we can discover that law too. And now, to answer your question about China, I think there is a very strong resonance between like Aboriginal law in at its core, and the kind of core principle of Taoism in China. And I don't think that's accidental. I think it's because Tao is a memory, a cultural memory of a pre-agrarian Chinese past. You know, in China, unlike in the West, there was such a continuity of culture through the course of the agrarian revolution, that early understanding of lawfulness that I think comes to pre-agrarian societies through their intimacy with their natural environments, because, you know, they have to live from the land, directly from the land. So they have to know ecologies in a very, very intimate way. So Taoism has retained a kind of cultural memory of that indigenous past, and it's enshrined in Taoism, and particularly, I think, in the notion of Wu Wei, which is this principle of least resistance, really. So I think that China is far more favorably situated philosophically, if you like, to rediscover within its own traditions the seeds of a new ecological consciousness for a 21st century than we in the West are. We have to really critique our whole tradition in order to try to recover something of that earlier ecological consciousness, right. Whereas it's still core to Chinese thinking. You know, it hasn't been that popular politically. Taoism is not the most popular tradition in China because it's very kind of anarchist, and it doesn't, it's really like a counterculture in China. It doesn't directly serve the state in the way that Confucianism does.
Right.
But it is deep, I think, still very deep, that principle of accommodating the world around one rather than opposing it. I think that's still very, very deep within Chinese thinking, and Chinese polity even. And so there is a lot to build on, you know, once that tradition is acknowledged for for the potential that it has, then I think the Chinese are in a position to be far more creative about addressing the ecological crisis than we in the West are. So I just think it's worth our while really encouraging China on this front, really saying, look, the ball is in your court, China. Forget all this, you know, saber rattling and posturing. Like, that's not the path to greatness in this time. That's not to achieve kind of military supremacy is not in any way answering the incredibly pressing problems of our time. It's not actually going to earn the respect and admiration and love of the rest of the world. But, you know, if you could really lead the way towards adapting our contemporary civilization, adapting modernity to the needs of ecology, then we would be so thrilled with you, you know. We would think you were so great, and you wouldn't have to, you know, saber rattle or anything. And especially young people around the world would think China was so great and would be happy, more than happy, you know, to follow the Chinese example and be Sinophiles and get sinicized and everything in the way that young people used to be Americanized, you know, westernized. So that was the idea behind the letter to China, that we need to encourage, we in the West, I mean, we're not nearly appreciative enough of Chinese civilization, or indeed any other civilizations. You know, I think we're real bored like that.
Yeah, yeah, very much so. And yeah, I appreciate that, especially because studying Taoism was one of the things that really got me interested in philosophy when I was like a teenager. And so still to this day, it's a deep influence on me personally. And so I really appreciate you kind of bring out this eco-Taoist kind of philosophy. I know there's also a lot of work where people are saying, well, and Confucianism can help too. And I always appreciate that.
Yeah.
But there's definitely
they do say that.
there's something very special about Taoism, about the principle of Wu Wei and things like that, that just, yeah, really speaks to me. And the way you connect that to Australian Aboriginal life ways, I really appreciate that connection. So I'm excited. The Spinoza meets Taoism meets Australian Aboriginal traditions. That's such an interesting set of connections. Yeah, I really like that.
And they all meet ecology, you know.
Yeah.
They like, I think we as Westerners still, you know, captive to scientific thinking, we can find our clues to this law through ecology, because if you look at ecosystems, there really is a guiding logic to those ecosystems. And I mean a logic, not ecological laws in a scientific sense, but a logic that, you know, I call it the logic, the twin principles of connectivity on the one hand, and accommodation, least resistance on the other. And it's like that acknowledges that all living things are pursuing their own existence. That's what they're organized to do. That is their primary responsibility, you know, that.
Okay. Freya, so thanks for getting back on. Yeah, we lost you for a second there. I'm guessing it was
completely dropped out. Like everything just disappeared.
It's what happens when you talk too much about doing non-doing. Then that's like, okay, we can non-do.
Critiquing technology.
Yeah, exactly.
Technology.
All right, you want to make fun of us? Then we'll leave you to it.
Right, we'll fix you.
Well, so yeah, you were just describing this kind of balance, right? That by conserving your energy and kind of, going with the flow, then you're able to actually have more energy for attending to your self-actualization and your relationships to the larger world.
Yeah. And the best way of going with the flow is to accommodate the connectivities of all the organisms and life systems around you, rather than opposing them. As far as possible. I mean, you might have to oppose them if it's a real matter of like a vital interest of yours. But when it's not a vital interest, then make use of what is available, an affordance of your immediate environment, that the environment's giving you for free. Don't oppose the connectivities of others, and try to make sure that the way that you make use of those affordances feeds back in positive ways that support the needs and desires of those who are providing the affordances, So I call that's the kind of, it's the least resistance side of it. Accommodation is a way of least resistance. So it shines very nicely with Wu Wei, because Wu Wei is a way of least resistance, So, and that's coming from ecology. So I think there's a logic at the heart of ecosystems that is exemplified particularly through ecosystem engineers. I don't mean like people building bridges over swamps and things, but ecosystem engineers in the ecological sense, like beavers who do what they want to do. They build their dams, with they rearrange the riverbank in a way to suit their needs. But that, of course, then provides habitat and all kinds of affordances for the whole wetland community. So this is a very central ecosystem trope, this principle of accommodation and least resistance. So I think that they line up, like Aboriginal law, Wu Wei, which I do see as the path of Tao, really. That is the way Tao unfolds, through this way of Wu Wei. And then this core logic of ecology. So, we can learn, and I say we, meaning I shouldn't use we like that, but Westerners can also learn this. It's not in our DNA, unfortunately, but we can learn it, and we can look to, Indigenous people to provide us with the ways of knowing that are not bound by theory and scientific method, that are ways of knowing that do involve engagement with the known, require kind of communicative engagement with the known. And we can look to China to draw on its deep intuitions in this connection to try to start refashioning contemporary societies along these lines. And we can follow them, Again, I used we there because you and I are Westerners, so I'm using we in that sense. But it's time for the West to step back and follow other cultures that are better placed than we are to provide the leadership and the examples.
Yeah, I appreciate that. It's, really speaks to what the Forum on Religion and Ecology is all about, which is finding these resources all over the world. Where are these places where traditions are tapping into this recognition of a living cosmos, this kind of relational identity and ecological self, and everybody has it somewhere. It's just a question of kind of excavating it and learning to live according to that principle again. And then I like the final chapter of the book is kind of asking this question of, well, how are we going to reinvent our praxis to then live according to that principle and bring forth an ecological civilization? So I wonder if you could say one final kind of thing. What's your vision of an ecological civilization if we do it perfectly, right? Because right now things look pretty dire, of course, mass extinction, climate change. It's not a pretty picture out there. what would be one part of your vision of ecological civilization having kind of made it through this crisis, and we've made it to not necessarily a utopia, but a sustainable and mutually enhancing presence on the planet?
Well, Sam, I don't have that vision. For me, it's just one step at a time thing. I
That's
think
good.
the vision unfolds step by step a little more each time. I cannot see through the crisis that we're in to some pristine state beyond it. I just can't see it, you know. I find it hard even to see how we can marry up these Indigenous perspectives with the scientific perspective. I don't think that is as easy as it sounds, you know. So I don't have that vision. But what I've kind of fastened on to at the moment as a way forward is the idea of nature-led approaches to our problems. And this is something that has, under the name of nature-based solutions, it's something that is gaining some currency around the world, where we leverage ecosystems, wild ecosystems, you know. I mean, ecosystems following their own cognitive path, but we leverage them to incidentally produce benefits and solutions for us, while not hijacking them in their own unfolding, but actually promoting that unfolding, restoring where we need to, a bit in the spirit of rewilding, you know. And there are, I find these examples incredibly inspiring. And at the moment, they're really only well developed in relation to climate change mitigation and food production. There are some architectural examples from, you know, earlier Indigenous traditions. There are very few examples of how we can get ecosystems to provide commodities for us. I can't begin to see that, but, you know, if we start where we can, like with the climate change mitigation solutions, don't like solutions, but approaches, and with food provision, like human food provision, there are very clear examples of how we can, like, using our ecological knowledge rather than our hardware, you know, we can tweak ecosystems to deliver things that we need while unfolding in their own way to their own ends. And so a couple of examples that I cover in the book are Pleistocene Park in northern Siberia. If you haven't finished the book, you probably haven't reached that bit yet.
No, not yet.
This is so inspiring, and it's a project undertaken by originally just a single scientist, Sergei Zimov, in a very, very remote, far-flung part of northern Siberia. And he had an intuition that you could stop permafrost thaw, which, as you know, is one of the greatest threats to the whole planet in relation to warming, climate warming. If you could slow or halt the process of permafrost thaw by restoring the mammoth steppe, the grasslands that used to cover the whole of Siberia and extend all the way down through Mongolia and into China and into parts of Europe and so on. And the way that the grasslands managed themselves was through the Pleistocene megafauna. So the mammoths, the musk oxen, the bison, those little wild horses, and various other large herbivores, and their predators, the wolf and that lion, that Pleistocene lion. And that it was the action of the megafauna on the environment that sustained the grasslands, right? I mean, since the megafauna were exterminated by humans, 10, 12,000 years ago, the end of the last ice age, that grassland has deteriorated into the tundra, which is a much more simplified ecosystem than the grasslands were. And the grasslands were far more effective at retaining the permafrost, the frozen ground under the surface there, because they held the soil together. They have much higher albedo than the tundra, so they reflect sunlight back into space far more effectively than the tundra. And the action of the herbivores themselves, and remembering that they roamed in their countless millions over that vast steppe, during the winter, the megafauna would, they're all hoofed, right? They would all stamp down the snow, so that the snow would not insulate the soil, and the soil would freeze to a greater depth. And so again, in the absence of the megafauna, the snow is forming through the winter and insulating the soil. And so the soil is not freezing down every year the way that it did. And so that's a large factor in permafrost melt. So Zimov introduced, he got a reserve up there, a smallish reserve of some hundreds or thousands of acres, and started importing megafauna, not mammoths, but musk oxen. And of course, lots of de-extinctionists are really keen to bring the mammoths back and put them in there, but that's a distraction. It's not about that. And so this has been going on now for about 30 years, and with great difficulty, he, now with his son and with further support, have introduced herds of megafauna into this reserve, and they've been measuring the effect on the ground, and they are finding that the winter temperatures of the soil are like 15 degrees lower.
Wow.
Than they are outside the reserve.
Wow.
So this is a strategy that would have large-scale planetary effects if it were upscaled, And this is we don't have to do anything except set it up, bring back the megafauna and just let them do the job.
Right.
It's a fantastic example of accommodation and least resistance, or Wu Wei. It's just let the fauna do the job. Yeah. Let the flora do the job. Find solutions where we don't have to do everything. Let nature do the job, but it takes a lot of knowledge, ecological knowledge and other kinds of knowledge to know when problems can be solved in that way. Yeah. So I find that approach really like incredibly inspiring now. And there are more and more examples of it beginning around the world. So that's enough for me at the moment. Like I'm happy to have some kind of strategy that is really, really aligned with law. And I say law with a capital L all this time, really, really aligned with that kind of core cosmic ought, and that we can see that it works. Let's just go with that.
Yeah. No, that's a fantastic example. Yeah, what a beautiful
Yeah.
illustration, and like overall such a great message. Step by step. We don't have to predict the future. Step by step and follow nature. That's,
Yeah.
yeah, a really really beautiful way to put it. And geez, such a heartening example. I can't imagine a better high note to kind of end on.
Oh, me neither.
So yeah, thank you so much, Freya Mathews. It's really been a pleasure talking with you. Really appreciate you making time for us, and thanks to everybody else for tuning in. We'll be back with some more conversations for you soon. In the meantime, take care and be well.
Thanks so much, Sam.